the first thing you have to do is just accept that life is good and bad. Like, it's okay if you're not happy every second of the day. It's okay if you're having sadness or grief, or a client's angry at you, or you make a mistake. Like, that's all human, and that's our human experience. And I think we tend to forget that, and we think that we're always supposed to have it easy and smooth, and it's all supposed to be good.
Hello and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Julie Cappel. Julie is an author, life coach, podcaster, speaker, as well as a veterinarian with a diverse range of experiences. She is a small animal, avian, and exotic veterinarian, as well as a successful businesswoman, in addition to a devoted wife and a loving mother of 2 adult children. So Julie, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here.
We're excited to have you. And it sounds like based on that introduction, we've got a lot in common. So I'm excited to see where our conversation goes today.
That's excellent. Yes. I think it's going to be really fun. I've listened to some of your podcasts and I've really enjoyed them.
Awesome. Well, to begin with, let's talk a little bit about how you made the connection or transition, or I guess you're doing both as far as veterinary medicine to life coaching.
Well, I owned a veterinary hospital for over 20 years. Have been a veterinarian for 35 now. And about 8 or 10 years ago, I started to think that I needed a new challenge, because after running the same business for 20 years, you've kind of solved all the problems a million times. And I'm the kind of person that likes change, and I like to kind of challenge myself. So I was looking for the next thing, whether I was going to sell my practice, buy a second practice, exactly what I wanted to do. And so I started searching a little bit. About that same time, my nephew took his own life. And so that was a little bit of a wake-up call for me to start looking at all of the other negative things I've been hearing in vet med, because vet med was getting kind of this reputation of being one of those careers that is very stressful. And there was a lot of talk about the suicide rates going up in our profession. And so as I was searching for what I wanted to do next, I thought, well, what could I take all my loves, my leadership? I love self-development, self-help. I've always been kind of a self-help junkie. I kind of always thought psychiatry and psychology were super interesting. But I really didn't want to go back to school for all those years to get those degrees. So I stumbled across life coaching. I started to investigate it, and I just thought it was the perfect thing for me, because it took all the skills that I already had with my business, coaching my employees. I was kind of that kind of person anyway. And could I develop that into something that would serve the profession? Because I love veterinary medicine so much, and I just was disturbed by the negativity that was out there. All the social media sites, people were complaining about it and how horrible the clients were and how hard of a job we have. And all those things are true, but I thought there had to be a way to make it better so people could manage their mind better. And when I discovered life coaching, I was like, that is the key to everything. So I started to study.
Yeah, there's similarities, I think, across healthcare, whether with animals or with humans, but that negativity and just the pressure can be a really difficult combination to manage.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, and then on top of that, with vet med, the people that are getting out of school more recently than I did, and even when I did, they've got huge student loan debts, and their student loan debt to starting salary ratios are really, they're really far apart. And so there's all this pressure. And a lot of veterinarians are women now, more so than ever before. And then they also have that pressure of, how am I going to raise a family? How am I going to pay back my student loans? How am I going to run a household and be a veterinarian with all the pressures? And so that's kind of what I decided as my second life mission, is to help people deal with that, be happier, and really get back to loving what they do, because I love it so much.
So it sounds like there's some element of your personal experience inspired you to look and see if others in your field were experiencing the same thing and find a way to help them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because I had all those challenges, being a hospital owner, being a mother. I owned the whole hospital on my own. I really didn't know what I was doing when I bought it. I kind of had to learn by trial and error. And, there are a lot of tools out there now, more so than when I started because of the internet. But I really do think that it's a double-edged sword because there's so much positivity, but there's also a lot of negativity that people pick up on. And so I wanted to offer them a different way of thinking about it. And there's ways to be successful in vet med, love your life, raise kids, not without problems, not without stress, not without, mistakes, but it's possible. And if you love what you do, you can stay in this profession and continue to do it and have everything that you want.
So without giving away your secret sauce per se, what are some of those strategies that you teach people?
I think the first thing that I learned when I was doing life coaching that that really kind of blew my mind because I hadn't really heard the concept before is that the first thing you have to do is just accept that life is good and bad. Like, it's okay if you're not happy every second of the day. It's okay if you're having sadness or grief or a client's angry at you or you make a mistake. Like, that's all human. And that's our human experience. And I think we tend to forget that. And we think that we're always supposed to have it easy and smooth and it's all supposed to be good. And because we have that negativity bias, we always focus in on all those negatives. But then there's also positives. So one of the life coaches that I was learning from, she would say life is 50-50. And even though that's not necessarily true, I thought it was an interesting way to think about it. So when you're having a good day, it's like, 50% good. And then the next day might not be so good. Okay, well, that's to be expected because life is supposed to be that way. And I think as children, we're taught that if you're not happy and things aren't perfect, that something's wrong with you or something's wrong with your life. And that was something that really put a light bulb over my head because I'm an optimistic person by nature. And so for me, I was like, I just would kind of trudge through and push through. But I think that just teaching that concept that, okay, this is the way it's supposed to be. You have 20 great clients per day and you might have one bad one, but that's okay. And, that's not something you need to focus on. You can focus on the 20 that were kind to you. So that was one of the things that I learned that I really try to impart on my clients. And then the other thing is that it's all under your control. Your happiness, your life, the way you look at things, it's all under your control. And that primitive brain that we have that's so powerful, and we all are taught about that, we don't realize that that's just the protection mechanism that we have. And it's trying to make us, keep us safe and keep us in the cave and all the things that people say. And I call it the Chihuahua brain because it reminds me of a little scared dog that's trying to bite at everybody because it doesn't know what's going to happen. But just that part of your brain is still under your control. And so I try to teach them that, if they can accept their feelings, feel their feelings, and then work on their thoughts about all of that they can indeed change their life. Not their circumstances, but their life, which is, it's a really cool concept.
It is.
And it doesn't necessarily come easy, but it's doable and it's possible. And, whether you get help with a coach or a therapist or a friend, or, someone can help you through it if it's difficult for you, but it's all available and it's all possible.
Yeah, it's all about reframing and using those tools and challenging our thoughts.
Absolutely.
But I want to zero in a bit more on something that you mentioned earlier and a couple of things that I want to connect. So you mentioned that sometimes, there are difficult clients. And I imagine in your line of work, those difficult clients may come from being upset or scared or angry about what's happening to their pet and in some cases their best friend. So I imagine, because Oren and I have experienced this with our clients, grief is probably a big thing that veterinarians and those working in your clinics and hospitals have to learn how to cope with, deal with, and guide people through. When we work with clients, oftentimes, and I'll speak for myself, but I know Oren has experienced this too, that a lot of clients will preface, their sadness and their grief and just the profoundness of that sadness of, I know it's just an animal, but I think that it's, unless somebody has a pet, sometimes they don't understand that degree of sadness. So a brief story that I'll share. I have 2 senior ragdoll cats. I have one that's 14, one that's 15. They're like my babies, one in particular. So the one that's 15, when he was just about 10 years old, had an attack of acute kidney disease, and we thought we were going to lose him. And even telling this story just makes me sad to think about it, because
I know the emotions come back, right?
The profound level of sadness that I felt with the prospect of possibly losing my little baby Gatsby was like nothing I had experienced. And I will preface too, it almost feels silly saying that out loud because he's just a cat. But again, that level of sadness is so much to deal with and to manage. Unfortunately, I'll say that the veterinary hospital that we went to, I don't know if they were equipped to guide clients through that. But I guess my question and my point in telling that story is, what are some things that you recommend to people working in your line of work as far as helping guide clients through that?
Well, I think the first thing is just realizing how that bond is so strong. And in most cases, it's stronger than with any of your relatives. Like my dogs are here in the room with me right now. My kids, one's in Dallas, one's in California. They're far away, and those pets are with me every minute of every day. And so I think the first thing for veterinarians, and most of us know this and we realize this because we have our own pets, is how important those relationships are. And that grief of losing a pet or having a pet ill is pretty much the same as a human. Not necessarily if you lose your child or your parent, there's different levels of grief, but it's grief. And so I think just knowing that, we all experience grief differently. There's the stages of grief where people get angry. And so a lot of times we get that part of it. They're angry at us because we can't fix their pet. And so just being open to that emotion and not taking it on. And the hardest thing about being in that situation with clients is they go through all those stages of grief, but in different orders. So you just really never know what you're going to get. Some people are very accepting right from the beginning. Some people are very angry. Some people are just in denial. And so just trying to meet them where they are, be open to all the emotion, not necessarily to take it on. It doesn't have to be my grief, but I can understand it and empathize with it and help them work through it in whatever way I can. And so I think euthanasia and, tragic illness in pets is one of the hardest things we deal with, but I think it's also one of the best things we deal with because it's such a skill that nobody else has. Unless maybe you're a hospice nurse or, some doctors, I suppose a lot of doctors have to go through this, but ours is a daily thing, and pets have such a short lifespan that, we're with the same clients. I have some clients that I've been through 3 or 4 sets of pets now. Their first couple dogs pass, they get 2 more, or their cats, and then the next 2. And, and we've been through this many times before. So I think being able to show empathy, understand the stages of grief so you can help them work through them and accept all of them, even the anger, and then just not taking that emotion on as your own, which is the hardest part, right? If somebody's angry at me, thinking that it's me, when it really isn't. It's they're angry at the situation. They're angry at, sometimes the grief is even grief of loss of income because it's expensive to take care of their pet. Grief of control. They don't have any control over their finances, and now this pet comes up with a $10,000 problem that they can't afford, and then they have to euthanize. Those are things that we deal with, and they're very difficult, but I think on some level I feel privileged when I do that. If I can help someone navigate that process and get to the other side, and really letting them experience the grief. And not poo-pooing it. It's not just a cat. It's not just a dog. I did a lot of bird medicine, or I still do. And And people are just as attached to birds and lizards and rabbits and, any pet that they have, there's a special bond. So I think understanding that bond is so important for us.
Yeah. And Oren, I know you had a monkey as a pet some time ago. So.
Oh, how fun is that? What kind of monkey?
Capuchin, ringtail capuchin.
Really? How fun. Yeah. How long did you have that for?
I was pretty young, so I'm going to say it was less than a year.
Okay.
Yeah, we just weren't well equipped to handle a monkey.
I don't think anybody's well equipped to handle a monkey. I don't think anyone should have a monkey as a pet.
Well, I think unless you have ample space and resource, and we didn't have that. And
right.
Yeah. So,
really
but my parents were hippies, and it was legal at the time.
That.
Yeah,
it was a cool thing to do.
Yeah, and then the interesting thing was there was someone maybe within a 5-minute radius from us who also had a monkey. So she was better equipped. She had a bunch of exotic animals.
So did she take it on?
No, she did not. We had to find. We found someone who had kind of had the resources, like a farm,
like a sanctuary or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So
were you attached to your monkey?
Sorry, was I attached?
Yeah, emotionally attached. Oh, yeah.
Emotionally, yes. I was younger, and our sister, we adopted my sister shortly afterwards. So I was about maybe 7 years old at the time. Attached, but not as attached, let's say, for example, as we've had myriad animals since then and before. A closer bond with, let's say, our dogs and cats because we had them for longer. And again, just because she was a monkey, we weren't well equipped, so we didn't get the time to be able to, let's say, physically bond with her as much because she was just kept in a small space that and freaked out with a bunch of humans. So unfortunately, that's the part where I think a lot of people, once they experience it, they understand that physical touch. I mean, that's what's just so soothing. Just having this animal, this creature, this being that loves you unconditionally for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Just physical. So that was what was perhaps lacking with our monkey.
Right. Yeah, pets are just it's such a different bond, but I think until you have one and you experience it, it's hard to imagine how attached you get.
And so can I ask you, because you're talking about, how stressful and, it can take a toll on one's well-being. And so, I mean, I know, and first of all, having, brought a number of animals to veterinary clinics and hospitals and, getting different levels of quality of care and so on. One thing I'm sure that you get, and you alluded to it earlier, that maybe the biggest complaint or one of the biggest complaints is the cost. Costs seem like, where do these numbers come from? They seem inflated. Like, how can you charge as much? But you're the only business in town or the game in town, so we're forced to. So when people sometimes people probably do it directly, sometimes maybe passive aggressively. How do you deal with that? Not just internally, but in dealing with a client who does have these complaints. How do you manage them?
Well, it's difficult because we understand it, right? Like my dog last year had a problem where I had to take him to a specialist and have surgery. And it was quite expensive. And my husband questioned me, like, why are you spending this money on this dog? And the answer was because I can. I have it, I can spend it. But some people don't. And so that's always one of those dilemmas. But I think explaining it to clients, the finances of it, is difficult because they want to compare it to human medicine where they have high levels of insurance coverage. And in veterinary medicine, we don't. There is animal insurance that you can buy for your pets, but most people don't have it. And so our prices are the prices. So when you go to the hospital, to the ER or whatever, if you're there for one day, it's probably going to be a, $20,000 or $30,000 bill. But we don't see that because our insurance pays it. In vet med, it could be several thousand. And it sounds like a lot of money, but there is a ton of overhead when you're running a veterinary hospital. You have to have all the machinery, x-ray machines are $30,000 to $40,000, ultrasound machines, all the equipment, highly trained professionals. A lot of the people that work in emergency medicine are higher trained than the general practitioners. And even the general practitioners, spend $200,000, $300,000 to get through school. You also have your licensed veterinary technicians that have to be paid, your receptionists. There's tons of overhead that most people don't understand unless they run a business. And so that's the first thing. And explaining that to a client is difficult for you to say, look, all these people I have to pay and the lights and they really don't understand it. But that's one thing that I think would be helpful. And then the other thing is putting that value on the pet. Like they don't always see that they adopted this pet and spent $150 to adopt it, this cat or whatever, or they found it on the street, but now they have to pay money to have it spayed and neutered. And, those are major surgeries that we do exactly like somebody in the human profession would do, with all the things, all the monitors, the gas anesthetic, and like all the things that they don't see. So the hardest part is getting the clients to understand where those costs come from. And then the second would be, if they're struggling, is trying to counsel them through now the stages of grief. Because now you're grieving if you can't afford something for your pet. And I think that's where the anger comes from. When I explain to my veterinary clients, like, these clients aren't angry at you. They're angry at the situation that they're in. They adopted this cat. They really don't have extra income sitting around for their pets, or they didn't anticipate it, so they didn't save up or whatever. And now you're telling them that they're going to owe you several $1,000s in a day or two after their pet has surgery or whatever. And they're just not prepared. They're not prepared for the emergency. And so they go into those stages of grief. They deny, oh, how can it be that much? Blah, blah, blah. They get angry. They start bargaining. Can you do it cheaper? Don't you love animals? That's the one we hate the most. If you loved animals, you would do it for free, all those things. And so we have to be really strong and just stand up for our profession and know that there's help out there. There's humane societies, there's rescue groups, I work on the Michigan Animal Health Foundation board, which offers grants to people to help with their pets' finances. And so there's resources out there for people, but they just want to turn it all back on us. And that's one of the most difficult things we do is dealing with those kind of emotions. But if you can just go along with them and understand, when my dog had to have surgery and they gave me the bill, I was like, whoa, I didn't anticipate that. But then I had to decide, okay, do I want this dog or do I not want this dog? Like, those are my choices. And then trying to counsel them even through that, going from I can't afford this to maybe it's better to do euthanasia is really a tough road. But you can get good at it as a veterinarian. You can work through all those emotions with people and get them to the right decision for them. It's their pet, it's their decision, it's their pocketbook. And that's where we have to go. We can't judge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, when you were answering one of Melanie's earlier questions, you were touching upon a lot of the, let's say, what I consider tenets of good mental health and of therapy or counseling. And, you're talking about control and, you talked about happiness. I focus more on fulfillment. And I say happiness follows, and what you're describing, like having a fulfilling career and so on. Right. And Melanie mentioned framing as well. Well, one other part that kind of ties those things together, or way it's tied together, and I'm a big fan of that, is metaphors. I try to pick metaphors that kind of connect to the client or patient. For you, coming from the world of medicine and of animals, do you find yourself using certain metaphors, like themes of metaphors?
Probably so. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Maybe you can if you're good at this. I use a lot of personal stories too. To try to relate to clients, because I've been through lots of pet situations since I've had lots of pets. Metaphors. I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head. That's a really good question. Can you think of one that would apply
to
what we're talking about?
That's a good one.
I know. I'm like, I'm sure I use them all the time. But to come up with one right off the top of my head, I can't. So I apologize for that. That's a tough question that I didn't really think about. But I'm sure I do.
Right. Okay. Just sometimes people have there's themes that kind of, constitute sort of the framework of the work they do. And, I do talk about, like I mentioned earlier, about like unconditional love, where I'll always talk about like having certain pets, especially a dog, where, I kind of, even I say, this whole idea of unconditional love, I say, it's great in theory, but in practice, even Carl Rogers, who coined unconditional positive regard, I said, even in his book, he says it doesn't exist in humans. It doesn't truly exist. I go, it only exists in animals, for example. And people, I always see everyone kind of, or most people connect with that.
They get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
They can
it's
see the
true.
difference.
It's true, because as annoying as your pets are, you don't stop loving them. But I feel the same about my kids, and, they have their moments too, where I'm like, oh, being a mom is hard. But it's very similar. I think when you said unconditional love, it just kind of reminded me of something that I've talked about before to some of my veterinarians is, if you think of that bond that those clients have with their pet, and you can try to open yourself up to that love as well, that's going to make it easier for you. Like, if you're going to understand how they're feeling and put yourself in their shoes, it's going to be much easier for you to not take on all of their drama and emotion, because you get it. Like, I've been there. I get it. So that unconditional love piece, I think, is so interesting and important.
So
Sorry about that. I can't think of a metaphor.
No. Actually, and just so you know, I
I'm
thought of
real
one.
quick on my feet with that kind of stuff.
Well, I did think of one, by the way, that I use.
Share it with me.
But it's more just, it's an animal-based metaphor. But there's this great video, and I forget the woman's name. She swims with sharks, and there's an amazing video of her, and she's swimming, and she's looking at one shark in front of her, and there's another shark behind her that she doesn't see till the last minute, and then she turns around, and she's able to put her hand on its nose and kind of elevate above it, and just gently and calmly. And I use that with patients, and I find the video, and I say to them, I go, when you're not dealing with this material in the back of your mind, this unconscious material, these things that you're suppressing or repressing, I say it can just come and get you, whatever. I say, so having the courage to be able to turn around, to face what you're dealing with, and then to control, and like that's how you exercise control, and doing that with equanimity and so on. So anyway, so that's just one of the metaphors I use that involve animals, and it's a great video.
Right. I love that. I think I've seen that video, actually. It's a really good one. Yeah, the one that just popped into my head that I heard from someone else, so I stole this one, but it's like when you're dealing with all these emotions and you don't accept them and just embrace them, that it's like taking a beach ball and trying to push it underwater. Like, the harder you push them down, the harder they come back. So if you're dealing with anxiety or imposter syndrome or all that, and you just keep pushing it away rather than accepting it and dealing with it and getting help or whatever you need to do, that it just gets harder and harder the longer you try to do that. So I thought that was a good one, but I didn't make that one up. Right. I stole that.
Okay. So I think a similarity in our professions is the experience of compassion fatigue. And, much like your profession, we're dealing with all of those types of emotions with our clients, and even with those that we work with. Oren and I supervise and manage a team of therapists. So we're continually giving them coaching and feedback and tools and strategies to manage like everything that we take on as therapists.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So compassion fatigue, what does that look like in your profession, and what are the tools that veterinarians can use for that?
Well, compassion fatigue in our profession, it's pretty prevalent because of the fact that it's such a regular part of our day. If you're a medical doctor and you don't deal with dying patients every day, it's probably a one-off, like one of your patients dies. Our patients, because of the euthanasia situation that we're in, it's sometimes a daily occurrence, or sometimes even 3 or 4 times a day. On a bad day, you might go through 3 or 4 euthanasias. And so that constant empathy that you have to pour out is, I think, what causes the compassion fatigue. And also the taking on of the emotion. Like, I talked to another coach friend of mine, and she talks about if clients want to give you their emotion, that you need to leave it on the exam room table. Like, picture it like that they're offering you their grief, they're offering you their anger in a box, and you can either take it and keep it, or you can set it down and walk away. And I like that visual because it helps me kind of take all of that compassion that's turning into fatigue, because that's all it is. It's just we're over giving, and try to put a stop to it or protect yourself from it. And then I talk a lot to my clients about mindfulness and staying in the moment, and not constantly trying to regurgitate the things that happened before or the things that might happen next. Because if you can stay in the moment, I think it really does help you let go of the compassion fatigue or the fatigue. And then the other thing is getting help. Like I've been coached, I've been in therapy, other people have been I try to encourage people that is something that, as a professional that deals with this level of drama and trauma that we deal with, that in order to keep the compassion fatigue away, you have to actively do something. You can't just sit there and expect it all to be okay, because your brain absorbs it. Your brain, it starts to turn into anxiety and burnout, and compassion fatigue is the word that we use, but it's all of those things. And so you really have to understand that it's there, learn about yourself. How can you deal with it? And then go from there.
So as a result, are you finding that people are leaving the profession earlier? Like, is the level of resilience and the buffer that they have to deal with all that not as strong as perhaps in the past?
Absolutely. 100%. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I love this profession so much, and it gave me a beautiful life, and I've always been very enthusiastic about it. And one of the reasons I started life coaching is because of that, because people aren't handling it as well as they used to. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's generational, the way we were raised. I mean, I have some inkling that might be part of it. It's harder now because there's more to learn, there's more to know, there's more drugs. The people that are younger and getting out of school now have much more to learn than I had to learn back then. But yeah, absolutely. It's definitely gotten worse. And I'm trying to help people stay in whatever capacity. Don't have to be a full-time vet. There's so many options in vet med that you can do to fit your personality. But absolutely, definitely, they're leaving the profession, and it's going to be a tragedy at some point, because people like you that have pets need us. And now that I'm not in my hospital as much, I need veterinarians. I need veterinary specialists when my dogs get sick and it's something I can't handle. Like, we're so needed, and I'm afraid for our profession that it's going to crumble because of what's happening. But I'm optimistic too, because people like me are getting in and trying to help, and the corporations that run veterinary hospitals are learning about all these things and trying to help. And they're kind of changing the way we deliver veterinary medicine, which is better for vets, maybe not for clients in a lot of ways. But so, yeah, absolutely. It's a problem.
Yeah.
And can I ask you, just because Melanie and I talk about this quite a bit in different contexts, but what would you say, if you can, maybe the number one or top two or three traits or beliefs or perspectives of, let's say, new veterinarians coming in that makes them, let's say, less adaptive, less resilient, and so on? What are you noticing?
The thing that I notice most is most veterinarians are introverted. And I'm an extrovert, but many of us are introverted. That's difficult because our job takes a lot of extroversion. We're constantly on. It's almost like acting. They're very perfectionistic type people. So the perfectionism is difficult because you can't be perfect in this job. You're going to make a mistake. A case isn't going to go the way you thought it would. A drug's not going to work. Like, there's a lot of failure. And we have a huge fear of failure. So perfectionism, and maybe just the expectation that it's supposed to be different, that clients aren't supposed to be demanding, that clients aren't supposed to show anger. I think if we expect humans to act like humans, life is so much easier. Because then when someone comes in angry, you can be like, of course I'm going to have an angry person today. that's part of life. And can I get good at dealing with these angry people? I feel like over the years I got really good at dealing with angry people. And so now I kind of like it. I like the confrontation. When other vets say, oh, I hate confrontation, I just tell them, you can get good at that. It's a skill. And it's not that you want to fight. It's you want to get good at talking to them so you can resolve whatever the issue is. And once you get to resolution, then conflict is kind of fun. And so, but those are the main things I see. It's just that expectation that people are always going to be okay and that things are always going to go well. That's a problem. And then a big one is the financial problems that we have. That's stressful to a lot of people right now is thinking that they can't make enough money to pay off their student loans and buy a house and raise kids. And, and I'm not going to say it's easy. It would be easier if you went to law school probably to make a lot of money, but there are a lot of very wealthy veterinarians. So it's not something that's unattainable.
Mm.
So along those same lines, what advice would you give to young people who are maybe considering a career in veterinary medicine, especially with all the changes that you've described that have taken place in the field?
I think the biggest thing is to get a realistic view of what we do every day. When I was younger, in high school, I went and worked for a veterinarian, one of the few women that owned a practice. And she was really good to me, but I worked there all my summers, all my vacations, and really got a good idea of what it is that she did and what a normal day was like. I think that's super important. I think the other thing is just understanding yourself really, really well. Like if you know you're an introvert and this is an extroverted profession, then you have to set yourself up for success by planning in that regenerative time for your introvert self. Even me as an extrovert, when I come home from work, I'm like, ugh, don't talk to me. My husband will start talking and I'll be like, just give me like 30 minutes because I've been extroverting all day. So just knowing that about yourself, I think is really important. So I would tell people that a realistic view, getting to know yourself, and then maybe getting some of these tools under your belt before you even get there. Understand why you want this. Do you have a strong why? And if you have a strong why, it's going to be so much easier to persevere when it gets tough, because it's going to get tough. And that's just life, right? And you've chosen a hard profession. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not valuable. Like it's so rewarding. Like I wrote a book last year and many of the things in my book are stories. And they're so touching, things that happened to me and what people think of you and situations that I was in that I was able to provide great care or, just really get to know people and understand them. And I think just understanding that that's part of it as well. So you're prepared for all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then don't be afraid to get help. Don't think that there's something wrong with you. Everybody has it. People ask me, oh, how did you get so stable? I'm like, I still have anxiety. I still get stressed out. I still have, you still have imposter syndrome some days. It's part of your normal Chihuahua brain, as I call it. And that's okay. It's just that now you have to learn how to deal with it and, be like, okay, well, one day you're a little anxious and that's okay.
Yeah. And you make such a great point about focusing on the good aspects and holding on to those gems, I guess. And the same is true of our profession too, that there aren't as many positives as negatives because nobody's coming to see us just like you on a good day per se.
Right.
But back to my cat, it ended up being a great outcome. We have such a great relationship with our veterinarian because we were taking my poor kitty in twice a week for his subcutaneous fluid. So we got pretty close with them. Right? And
you get very close and you get to know them and about their kids. And you know, that's one of the most fun things about it is getting to know the clients and their family and their pets because their pets are all unique.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that they know our cat and they know his quirks and his needs and so on. And he's happy and hehealthy now. So.
Well, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thanks.
Aren't vets great?
Yes. And that's the point of my story there is that the worst thing turned into something great and positive.
Well, and we don't always hear that. And that's another thing I remind them. We hear the bad things because people will come to you when they're angry and they don't always come to you when they're happy.
Yeah.
but you'll hear about it at some point. Later, they'll come back and they'll say, the best thing you ever did was put my dog to sleep or whatever, and you'll be like, whoa, really? Yeah, you were so good and so awesome. And now I have a new puppy and I'm bringing him back to you. And that's the joy of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this podcast, something that we do at the near the end of every episode is look at what can people do with all this information, because we've thrown so much out there. We've talked about the good, the bad. We've talked about your life coaching experience as well as your veterinary experience. But if you were to provide our listeners with a takeaway here, what is something that people can do to promote their wellness working in the healthcare profession, or promote joy and fulfillment with being pet owners? What would you say?
Well, I think to the pet owners, first, I would say realize what your veterinarian is going through and maybe cut them a little slack at times if you can, because you don't know when they come in to see your puppy what they've done the other part of the day. You don't know if they've lost a patient on the operating table. You don't know if they've been into euthanasia. Just to be understanding that they're also humans and they don't have all the power to fix everything. So that would be one thing. To the veterinarians and the people that work in vet med, would just to understand how valuable you are to humanity. Like, this is a really, really important job that we do. And I think sometimes we don't feel that way because of either the financial way we're treated, because, our prices are so much lower than human medicine, but we're basically the exact same thing. Or just the way people think of us. They think of us sometimes, some clients, not all, think of us as like auto mechanics. You bring the pet in, we fix it, you go home. And it's like guaranteed that it's going to work and they're going to be fine. And, some people have that opinion. And so just realizing that how valuable we are, and that you can have a beautiful life doing this job. You may have to put in a little work on yourself, getting help or getting coaching or therapy in order to stay healthy. Because as therapists, and I know as a coach now, that you also take on those emotions of the people that you're coaching or doing therapy for. And so then you have to take care of yourself as well, in whatever way it is: mindfulness, exercise, yoga, good eating, hydration, coaching, therapy, all the things. You have to make that a priority as well.
Absolutely. Oren, any last thoughts or questions?
Just one, you do have the metaphor that you mentioned now a couple of times. I should have mentioned, not aside from that, the Chihuahua brain. So you do have
my Chihuahua brain thing. It just occurred to me one time. I was making up a slide presentation and I saw this picture of this like terrified Chihuahua, and that's what we experience with some dogs. They're just screaming and freaking out before you even touch them because they're so terrified, and that's what it reminds me of.
Okay. And the second one, you started saying it toward the end, and Melanie mentioned as well, the idea of, and again, it's going away sort of from fun and more from rewarding. Okay. Like your job, there's a lot of non-fun things, but there's a lot of rewarding. And as you said, even if someone comes in angry, agitated, whatever, if you're able to contain them, help diffuse the situation, it may not be fun for everybody, but it's certainly rewarding, fulfilling, and rewarding is a cousin to fulfillment. So I think it's really important for people to know, for any career, especially, why am I doing this? Why have I got into this? Right? What about me makes me think I'm well suited, or what am I going to get from this? And, just being honest with yourself. And, some people maybe aren't cut out for certain type of work.
Yeah.
So you have to have a comprehensive.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, you need to know what you're getting into. You have to be really realistic. And so I think it's really important for anybody. Before you get into any field, do your research. Are you really well suited? Are you going to be able to make it through?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. What is it about? What can you find in this profession, or any profession for that matter, that gives you your life purpose and is rewarding? And there's just so many things you can do. You don't have to be a veterinarian. I just happen to think it's the best. So I want to encourage people that wanted to be veterinarians and actually did become veterinarians or work in the animal field to enjoy it and get the most out of it.
So where can people find you? Where can our listeners find your podcast, your book?
Well, my podcast is called the Veterinary Life Coach Podcast. So you can find it all the places. And I do some interviews and some on my own. And it's mostly about having a better life. I have a website. It's theveterinarylifecoach.com or juliecappel.com. Either one will get you there. And you can email me at jakappeldvm@gmail.com. And Google and I'll pop up and reach out. I love to hear from people of all professions, not just veterinarians, but.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Julie, thank you so much for being with us today. I think you've shared some really valuable information.
Yeah, it's been really a fun conversation. I appreciate it so much.
Great. Okay. And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.